Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dive deep into the incredibly gritty reality of nature. I mean, forget all those majestic, beautifully orchestrated scenes you usually see in wildlife documentaries. Today, we are mapping out the dark, unfiltered truth hidden right there in our sources.
So, do you think you have it rough? Seriously, before you complain about your daily grind, your morning commute, or the absolute stress of your inbox, let's take a step back. Let's explore what it's really like to be born, to live, and to die out there in the animal kingdom. We're going to start right at the absolute beginning of life, and trust me, it puts our human problems into some serious perspective. All right, part one, toughest animal childhoods, the rough start. You can go ahead and forget about a cozy crib. In the wild, your very first moments are literally an immediate, terrifying battle for sheer survival.
Imagine being a baby flamingo. You are definitely not born in some lush green paradise. No, you're born in a scorching, super salty lake. Now, they do this to stay safe from predators, which, sounds pretty smart at first. That is until the water starts to dry up. When that happens, heavy chunks of salt actually crystallize on the baby's legs, forming what are basically incredibly heavy, dragging salt socks. And honestly, the brutal journey only gets worse from there. Wearing those literal salt socks, you have to trek for miles under a baking sun just to find fresh water. The stakes are absolute. If you stumble, if you fall, the salt actually eats away at you. There are no rescue missions here. You're just left behind to die in the heat.
Okay, but if you thought a flamingo's trek was rough, consider the giraffe. Mom gives birth standing up. Yeah, that means your very first introduction to the world is a 6-foot free fall straight to the hard ground. Now, this brutal drop actually serves a purpose. It snaps the umbilical cord and kickstarts the baby's lungs. But there's zero time to rest. You have to stand up and run within minutes, because the scent of your birth blood, it attracts hungry predators instantly.
But wait, if we're talking about the absolute worst welcome to the world, the Komodo dragon definitely takes the prize. Forget predators lurking in the bushes. Your biggest threat is your own family.
The exact moment you hatch from your egg, your survival protocol is terrifyingly simple. Run for your life. You have to immediately sprint and climb the tallest tree you can find to hide, because if you don't, you're going to be eaten by your own parents or the other adult dragons nearby. Your very first day on Earth is a desperate game of hide and seek where the penalty for losing is literally becoming your mom's lunch.
Moving on to part two, nature's most depressing lives, the grind of adulthood. Because, let's be real, surviving childhood in the wild really just means you get to endure a miserable adulthood.
Take the cicada, for instance. You hatch from an egg without wings or eyes. You fall into the dirt, dig straight down into the dark, and you just wait underground for anywhere from 13 to 17 years. Let that sink in for a second. For over a decade, you are doing absolutely nothing but sitting in the dark dirt, eating and growing. And your grand reward for all this epic waiting, you finally dig to the surface, live for about 3 brief weeks, and then you die. That's it. That's the whole story. Now, you might be thinking, hey, immortality sounds pretty great, right? Well, look at the immortal jellyfish. When you get sick, injured, or old, you don't actually die. Instead, you sink all the way to the bottom of the ocean, turn into a literal blob, and reset back into a baby. You are stuck in this infinite, completely aimless loop of floating around doing nothing. And the only way this depressing cycle ends is if you get mangled alive by a fish or a crab. Or, let's compare that to the male and female redback spider. If you're born a male redback, your existence is incredibly bleak. Your one and only purpose in life is to find a mate, breed for just a few fleeting seconds, and then literally sacrifice yourself. How? By diving directly into the giant female's mouth to be brutally eaten alive, all just to help fertilize her eggs.
Just to emphasize how utterly outmatched you are in this scenario, the female redback is an incredible 8 times bigger than the male. You literally never stood a chance. It is a straight-up biological suicide mission.
Finally, if we want to talk about a truly depressing daily grind, picture the Greenland shark. Your story begins in the freezing cold, pitch-black waters of the Arctic. You're born into total darkness, and spoiler alert, it doesn't get any brighter from there. Your daily routine is an absolute nightmare. You swim slower than a human walks, completely alone in the freezing dark. Your meals? Just scavenging the remains of dead animals. And as if that wasn't dreary enough, you eventually go completely blind because parasites literally latch onto your eyes. And here is the real kicker. You don't just do this for a normal lifespan. No. You get to do this miserable, slow, blind, freezing routine again and again for over 400 years. It is an absolute endurance test of sheer isolation.
All right, part 3, the truth about crow funerals, the end and aftermath. We've seen the brutal births and the incredibly depressing adult lives, which brings us to the very end of the cycle, how nature handles death. And our source material reveals something truly astonishing about birds you probably see every single day.
So you've probably heard of a crow funeral. When a crow dies, others gather around the body, staring at it and calling out to each other. For the longest time, the human assumption was that this was a funeral out of sadness, mourning a fallen friend. But nature's reality, it's far more clinical and calculated. It is not a funeral at all. It's an active crime scene investigation. When they gather around staring at the dead bird and calling others to join in, they're actually pooling their collective intelligence. They're trying to figure out exactly what caused the death of their flock member. The goal isn't to grieve, it's to gather data so the surviving crows can learn how to avoid the exact same fate. It's pure, unfiltered survival logic.
But what happens if we humans completely misunderstand the situation and decide to, get involved in this investigation? Let me give you a pro tip right now. Do not tamper with the evidence.
If you walk over and actually hold the dead crow, the observing birds instantly view you as a prime suspect. They become highly aggressive. They will dive bomb you and call out warnings to all their friends in the area. And worse, crows have incredible memories. They will remember your specific face, they will go tell other crows about you, and they will literally harass you for years. You just become the neighborhood villain, all because you touched their crime scene.
And this brings up a really fascinating point about how we view the animal kingdom. We constantly look at nature through a human lens, assuming sadness and grief where there's actually just cold, hard data collection going on. It really leaves us to wonder, are animals ever truly sad in the way we understand it, or are their brains just constantly calculating their next optimal survival move?
As our source material perfectly puts it, what looked like a funeral was really an investigation. It completely reframes how we look at wildlife behavior, It strips away all that romance and reveals the raw intelligence underneath.
So let's put all of this into perspective. The very next time you feel stressed about your workday or you're annoyed by a super long line at the coffee shop, just take a breath and remember how incredibly lucky you are. You aren't wearing heavy salt socks in a baking desert, you don't have to dodge being eaten by your parents the second you wake up, and you definitely aren't doomed to a 400-year, blind, floating blob existence. The human grind really isn't so bad.
We've really peeled back the curtain on the majestic animal kingdom today to see the harsh machinery underneath. So I'll leave you with this one question. Knowing the brutal reality of how these creatures survive from their traumatic births to their investigative deaths, does nature's cold, calculating intelligence make it more or less fascinating to you? Definitely think about that the next time you see a crow in your neighborhood.